So you have to pull an all-nighter for your class. First of all, that's a horrible idea. Second of all, let me show you how to do it right. If you don't know me yet, my name's Ethan, and I basically made this channel to help college kids excel in their studies and hopefully get into a better grad school. So my first tip for all-nighters is you want to drink a lot of water. No matter what, you want to make sure you're constantly staying hydrated, because the biggest problem you're going to run into while trying to pull an all-nighter is brain fog. This is one of the number one things that you're going to have to watch out for. As you get later and later into the night and further into the next day, you're going to get more and more just kind of foggy and hazy and out of it. So everything we can do to prevent that, we got to take every precaution. So first of all, the most basic thing, you have to make sure you're drinking enough, because especially if you're like me, whenever I stay up very late, I happen to get migraines. So sometimes I just get very woozy and out of it when I'm staying up late, and dehydration can really, really contribute to this and make it so many times worse. So first tip, no matter what, just hydrate. You want to make sure you're consistently drinking throughout the night, throughout your studies, and just staying on top of that. My second piece of advice is actually from a book that I read called Managing Your Mind and Mood Through Food. And it basically has to do with what kind of food you're eating before and into your night of studying. The two main takeaways of this book are that if you're trying to eat for performance and basically just to increase your cognitive abilities and just focus, you want to make sure that you're not eating too many carbs, and you want to make sure you're not making your meals too heavy. So those are the two things you want to avoid. If you're pulling an all-nighter, you do not want to carb up, eating tons of rice, pasta, sugary foods before your study session, because it's basically going to spike your blood pressure and it's going to make you crash very early on, we don't want that at all. And along with that, also larger meals. I can imagine, if you can think back to the last time where you had a huge meal, Thanksgiving, and all you wanted to do was fall asleep afterwards. You want to make sure you're not having meals that are too large, because again, you're really just going to spike your blood sugar and crash way harder in an hour or two. What you do want to focus on is eating a lot of protein. So if we had to think of what you're going to eat the evening of an all-nighter, that really long study session, maybe what you're going to eat for dinner, I would suggest something like a lean meat, maybe chicken or fish, along with maybe a little bit of carbs, just nothing too excessive, maybe some fruit, but keep it simple. You don't want any heavy sauces, no cream sauce on your chicken, maybe just some hot sauce. Keep it easy. You don't want too many ingredients, something simple that's not going to put you right to sleep. Now, another food-related tip that you want to keep in mind is sort of when and how much caffeine you consume. If you know for a fact that you're going to do an all-nighter, then it's definitely useful to drink some coffee. I honestly don't think I could, or any of my friends could ever pull an all-nighter without drinking coffee or just some other form of caffeine, whether that be tea or maybe some nasty energy drink like a Monster, Celsius, whatever floats your boat. But at some point in the night, you're going to need some caffeine. The problem lies in sort of how fast you're drinking it and what time you're taking it. So one thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you're spacing out your caffeine intake. So if you have a thing of coffee, you want to make sure you're not chugging it right away and that you're sort of sipping it over time, because if you chug it too fast, you're going to have a much quicker, rise in energy and a much harder drop an hour or two later. What we want is more of a gentle increase in energy that you can kind of sustain over a couple hours. And eventually you're going to get that crash, just because you're up late into the night, you're going to get pretty tired eventually regardless, but we want to make sure that it's sort of more sustained and not a sudden smack right to the face when you're coming down from it. Also, if you're going to drink caffeine late into the night, make sure that you know for a fact that you're going to be pulling an all-nighter and that it's not just going to be maybe studying until 2 or 3 in the morning, because if you drink caffeine really any time past like 10, 11, you're really going to be up for several hours after that. If you decide, oh no, never mind, I don't want to pull an all-nighter, maybe I'm just going to stay up till 2 and then go to bed, you're going to realize that you're going to hop in bed and you're going to have trouble actually falling asleep. So first things first, if you don't know for a fact that you're going to stay up all night, don't drink caffeine super late into the night. Maybe have a little bit like 6 or 7 p.m. at the latest, But if you're drinking at like 12 in the morning and you're trying to get to bed at 2, I'll just tell you now, it's not going to work. And then along with that, we only want you drinking caffeine when you're genuinely tired. So you should not be drinking caffeine in preparation for a long night of studying. If you're not tired yet, do not drink any coffee. So if you say you want to pull an all-nighter, if it's 9 at night, don't drink coffee just because you think, oh, I need to stay up, I might as well drink some coffee. We want you drinking coffee only when you're really tired and when you're sort of losing focus. That's when we want that sort of caffeine kick. We don't want you just, chugging it all just because you think you should. Because that's when you're going to drink it all, and then in a couple hours you're going to crash. And then when you're sort of just in the heat of your studying, you come down and you're sort of woozy and you don't really know what's going on. Don't drink coffee just because you think you should. Drink it when you're genuinely tired. The next tip is to plan out your all-nighter before starting. The last thing we want when you're pulling an all-nighter is to sort of just be drifting around and not really sure what you want to study, sort of just looking at things here and there, not exactly sure where to start. If you go into a study session and you're not really sure where to begin, you're taking a lot of mental energy away from just, doing your practice problems, memorizing whatever you got to memorize. You're putting a lot more energy into, how am I going to set this up? How should I order my studies? And it really just sort of saps your focus. What we want is a complete idea of everything you're going to do that night in super fine, meticulous detail. So if I were to tell you that, before you even start studying, I want you to say exactly down to the hour. I'm going to spend this many hours. Let's say you're studying chemistry. I'm going to spend this many hours on, I'll spend 1 hour on SN1 reactions. After that, I'll spend half an hour reviewing chapter 21 concepts. I'll do half an hour of this. I'll take a 10-minute break. We want you to get super precise with it, because the more time you spend sort of just floating around, not sure what you're doing, it's going to make your session so much less productive. We want you to get in that sort of flow state, deep work, where you just can't be bothered and you're just really on it, where you're just fully focused. The more you have to think about how you're going to order your session during the session, the more energy you're going to take away from your studies. So I forget who said it. Someone said that 10 minutes of preparation is worth an hour of execution. So we really want you to just figure out what you're going to do before you do it. Never go into an all-nighter blind. That's one of the worst things you can do. And my next piece of advice is to occasionally move locations. If you're studying for hours and hours at a time, eventually you're going to run into the problem of getting really, really bored. And when you're sitting in the same place for hours at a time, it kind of just sucks the life out of you. You kind of just lose motivation. You're seeing all the same faces. You're seeing, the same room for just hours at a time. It makes you feel just unmotivated. Our brains are always searching for novelty. We just like to see new things. So if you're trying to stay motivated during your study sesh, mix it up a little bit. If you're studying in the library for hours at a time, maybe get up and, move to somebody's dorm, preferably something not too loud, just move to another building, set up somewhere else. And you might think that by moving somewhere else, you're kind of disrupting the session and making it not as productive, which I would agree if you're doing this successfully. If you're constantly moving to a new location every hour, then yes, you're going to be losing some productivity because you're kind of just constantly, wrestling yourself out of that focused state to go somewhere new. But if you're somewhere for hours at a time, I'd say it's much better to have sort of an environment change than just be sitting there for the entire session. Because as I said before, we really just got to switch things up. If you want to keep things interesting, change where you're studying, every so often. But don't be excessive with it. Do it maybe once or twice max throughout an all-nighter. And for the most part, just be studying the rest of it. We don't want to distract you, but we do want to keep things new and make sure, you're not dying. We want to make sure you're having a little bit of fun. Now, one thing that can make your session a lot more fun is studying with friends. But we do have to keep in mind that there is one major downside of studying with people who know a lot less than you. And that is that sometimes if you're studying with people who know less than you, you'll be expected to sort of teach them the information. And if you're also struggling to sort of cram all the information into your brain the night before, it's really, really disadvantageous to have to teach information to other people at the same time. Our brains can't really multitask. It's really difficult to be teaching someone else and teach yourself the information at the same time. So we really want to minimize the amount that you're teaching other people or taking your attention away from the stuff you really need to focus on. And This is a little tricky if you're a people pleaser because, if people are asking you for help, obviously they're your friends and you want them to do well. But one thing you have to remember is that, this is your education, you're paying for this too. So you also have to maximize how well you're doing in your classes. And you sort of have to become a little bit selfish with your time and realize that if you're not yet ready for a test, then you really have to prioritize your understanding over anyone else's. So, even though this sounds a little bit mean, say I was studying with someone for the same class and they kept asking me questions and I really just had to focus on, my own understanding. I didn't have a complete knowledge of it and I just really got to focus on myself. So if they keep asking me questions, you might be able to say something as simple as, I'm not really sure, like maybe Google that, as opposed to, giving them the answer for every single question, because it really just takes away so much of your time. And also it kind of establishes a precedent that, you're always the one who's there to like teach them the night before the test, which is also something you really don't want to establish. You want to make sure, they're learning this over time, not cramming it all, and especially not expecting you to teach to them, because you're not the professor. Even though they're your friends, it's not really your job to teach them all this information. Remember to prioritize your own studies during an all-nighter, and remember to not feel guilty about this either. This is your education. You deserve to focus on yourself while you're studying. It's not your job to teach other people at the same time. And one tip that I like is to always have some kind of motivation to keep going towards the end of the night. And this can usually be something external. So, for example, whenever I'd be studying really late into the night, sometimes I get a text from one of my friends and they basically say, oh, like, let's get some food or let's go on a night walk. And it's always good to keep something fun like that sort of just in your back pocket. Not to do a bunch, but, after hours and hours of studying, you really got to reward yourself somehow. If you're just studying for hours at a time and like losing motivation, it can really just be beneficial to sort of take a short break, maybe go on a short walk around campus, or maybe just, buy a sweet treat if there's, cookies around, pull it to Insomnia, get a chocolate chip cookie, like just chill out for 20 minutes. And you might like freak out about, abandoning your studies for a little bit, but again, like I've said, motivation is so important when you're pulling an all-nighter. And if you're really just having your motivation sapped by all the studying, that 20 minutes, even though you're losing it, even though it's lost study time, it means so much more than you can imagine to just kind of have that break, relax for a little bit and sort of just reset and just be able to, hit the ground running when you get back to your studies. So one piece of advice is, just take a break every now and then for a sweet treat. Go get a cookie or something. Now, my final piece of information is when you're pulling an all-nighter, you cannot do it with your yapper friend. We all have that friend who, is just like the best. They're super fun to hang out with, but they just keep talking and talking, and they just don't stop talking ever. And when you're pulling an all-nighter, your main objective is get all the information in your head, and if possible, go to bed. Like people, a lot of college kids especially, they like to take pride in pulling constant all-nighters, like it's some kind of badge of honor. Oh, I pull all-nighters every week. This is not healthy. This is not something you want to be doing regularly. If you say to yourself, oh, like the class was just too hard, I had to pull this all-nighter, that's never true. If you can manage your time well, ideally, you're never really going to be pulling all-nighters. This should be a very, very rare occurrence. For example, in my time as a neuroscience major, I've taken some hard classes. I've had to take some very difficult chemistry, biology, psychology. I've taken some very difficult classes. And, I've been up very late a lot of nights, maybe 2, 3 in the morning. But I've only pulled all-nighters maybe a handful of times. It's really not a necessary thing to do if you're staying on top of your studies. If you can sort of spread out your studying throughout the course of a week, always do that as opposed to an all-nighter. An all-nighter is a horrible idea, just from like a stress standpoint, from a memory standpoint, because you really need sleep to sort of consolidate what you learned the day before. So when you're pulling an all-nighter, it's really a last-case resort. And when you're studying with a yapper friend, it saps so much of your time just talking with them. Even though they're the best and they're like super fun to talk to, sometimes you just gotta text them, call them up, be like, I just gotta lock in tonight. I'm going solo. Maybe, tell a little white lie. Oh, I'm not feeling too well. I have a migraine. I can't study tonight. But your main objective is study and go to bed. We're not trying to prolong this. This is not an event. This is not a social hour. We really just want to cram the info in your head and get to bed if you can. So Yeah, even though we love the yapper friend, when you're pulling an all-nighter, that is not the place for them. Now, if you made it to the end of the video, I just want to say thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. This is one of my first videos, and I really appreciate you sort of just sticking to the end and hearing me out. And if you're interested in my content and you're a college kid and you really just want to get into a great grad school, you just want to learn the best study techniques to really just, increase your study game to 100, I suggest you subscribe. I mean, you're already here, you might as well. But anyways, thanks for listening. Bye.